2016 has been called the year of O.J. Perhaps no year since 1995 gave O.J. Simpson such a prominent place in the pop culture.
Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime.
Two major television events, the FX American Crime Story dramatized miniseries, The People vs. O.J. Simpson, and the ESPN documentary miniseries, O.J. Made in America, received critical raves, awards, and good ratings. Though it's worth noting that the viewers were only a fraction of those who watched the actual events unfold.
Let's hold on a second here. Seeing on the monitor this live helicopter.
State of California versus Orenthal James Simpson.
The FX series, despite an underlying seriousness,
we are Kardashians.
Often strikes a more playful
and in this
tone.
family, being a good person and a loyal friend is more important than being famous.
While the ESPN program,
and that's what makes this thing so sad,
feels consistently somber.
OJ was putting together his team,
going so far as to hint at the circus-like atmosphere of the trial, and then pull back contemplatively.
I'm not on board.
Ezra Edelman's O.J. Made in America is eligible for the Best Documentary Academy Award, which it fully deserves to win. Unlike the dramatic miniseries, which is more about all the other participants in the trial, the documentary very much centers on O.J. Simpson himself. That said, both miniseries are about much more than the travails of one person. They use the infamy of the trial of the century to reflect on broader themes and topics. Each project has its own strengths. The People vs. O.J. Simpson is able to take us places a documentary can't go, but by choosing to limit itself to the investigation and trial of the crime, it naturally presents a narrower, more focused view. On the other hand, O.J. Made in America emerges not simply as a brilliant biography, it's also a stunning social portrait that can stand beside any novel, epic film, or piece of long-form journalism. Its expansive scope allows us to witness what The People vs. O.J. Simpson can only suggest.
O.J., you've had quite a season.
Well, I have gained a few yards.
In this process, 7 subjects emerge.
The black man has been brainwashed, and it's time for him to learn something about himself.
With as much importance as Simpson himself.
All right, let's see what O.J. can do.
Despite its ambition and acclaim, Made in America had relatively humble origins. It was commissioned for ESPN's 30 for 30 sports documentary program.
Turned out the lights and started it.
Opening against the backdrop of 60s turmoil, the film contrasts its subject with defiant icons like Tommy Smith and John Carlos.
It was just one run.
Simpson's popularity is emphatically rooted in his athletic accomplishments. He's one of the great running backs in the history of collegiate and professional football. But this reason for Simpson's fame is often obscured by later events.
He was Baryshnikov.
Edelman ensures that we remember why Simpson was noteworthy.
When we see those people, they are special.
Before we settle on why he became notorious.
They just can do stuff that other people can't do.
During these early hours, it's easy to forget what we know and grow to admire the gridiron star, setting us up for the same fall that Americans present for the 70s, 80s, and 90s experienced in real time. The bulk of Made in America is formed by footage from the 40-year span of the story. Simpson's fame extended beyond the field to commercials, TV movies, interview shows, variety programs, and feature films. As he went from sports star to cultural touchstone, in his criminal trial, he was covered obsessively on the news.
The O.J. stories are everywhere.
And referenced in parodies. And his long, decadent decline dovetailed with the rise of reality television. The film covers a lot of ground, from 60s promotional films to 21st century TMZ, from Bob Hope
Here at OJU
to Kim Kardashian.
That's my goddaughter.
And from black and white stock footage to the HD that Edelman himself used. Home movies, television, cinema, courtroom cameras all contribute to the sense that Made in America is as much about how we capture various eras as those eras themselves. It also pinpoints how entertainment and news merged until the term pop culture came to encompass both.
I think we have to ask, at what point do what should be journalistic decisions become marketing decisions?
In addition to subjects that transcend geography, Made in America anchors itself
The image of Los Angeles was milk and honey.
in one very specific location. Yes, San Francisco, Buffalo, Miami, and Las Vegas all make their presence felt, but this is definitely an LA story. and it revels in the different sides of the city and the surrounding areas.
Become the trial of Los Angeles.
The glamour of Hollywood and the flaring tensions of downtown. The removed luxury of Brentwood, the desperation of South Central.
That wasn't how other parts of the city were being treated.
This documentary is as much about the history of Los Angeles as it is about O.J. Simpson.
There is no group in America to whom California has meant more than it has to the Negroes. In the 2 decades between 1940 and 1960, the Negro population went up by 600%.
This film captures the tension in a city which represents both the epitome of the fantastical American dream and the flashpoint of state violence, focused against some of society's most deprived citizens.
He stayed in Brentwood.
The film is very much about the yawning chasm between the haves and the have-nots.
When you lived in South LA,
Made in America almost entirely frames class
I took him places
through the prism of race.
where I think very few black men had ever been.
Simpson's life epitomized,
Grew up in the projects.
transcended, and subverted the gap between rich and poor.
Yeah, we were poor kids, you know.
Born in poverty, Simpson ascended to celebrity,
He was the first black member of the club, no?
consorting at country clubs
By a long shot.
and making business deals.
Embarrassing to him, but he's one of the owners of Honey Baked Hams, Ramada Inn.
Meanwhile, as the documentary constantly reminds us, the impoverished population of LA, specifically those who lived in the southern neighborhoods that were mostly black, experienced constant police harassment.
Next thing I know, they just tearing the place up.
2 totally separate worlds.
Some felt Simpson's fame, and particularly his wealth, made him a weak figurehead for poor communities.
It was a victory for a rich guy named O.J. Simpson, and I was troubled by it.
This is where O.J. Simpson performed community service as part of his sentence for beating his wife, Nicole. For part of his punishment, Simpson went golfing.
In one of the few notes of criticism in the otherwise positive review of A.O. Scott, he notes that Made in America does not contextualize violence against women the way it contextualizes police violence in black communities.
That was the history of domestic violence, with Simpson physically and psychologically abusing Nicole Brown.
My woman. Nonetheless, even in its exclusive focus on Nicole Brown Simpson,
He would beat her and lock her in closets at hotels.
Edelman's work paints a chilling, unflinching portrait of domestic abuse.
To call her a fat pig.
Simpson's documented torment over a decade and a half is depicted as both methodical and pathological.
He was as jealous as he was a good football player.
Can you imagine if every time he did something violent like that, that a report would have been made?
Perhaps just as importantly, the weak reaction of those around them is painfully exposed.
Portrayed in the press for a while, they're like a wife beater.
Well, yeah, and that bothered me.
If policing and race rose to the surface in the 90s and remain hugely relevant today, the brutal abuse experienced by the victim is the buried narrative that may sting in 2016 in a way it didn't in 1995.
What's the forbidden N-word they keep talking about, Mommy? She said, Nicole.
This case was becoming this weird referendum on the LAPD.
Any of the police officers that were called to testify by us lied on the stand.
If O.J. Simpson is one main character of Made in America,
they obtained those warrants simply to level and make uninhabitable those locations.
The other is the LAPD. And just as Simpson is shown from various, almost unimaginably irreconcilable viewpoints, so we learn that the police could appear to certain groups and individuals as something entirely different than they appeared to others.
They just were so sharp and professional all the time.
As is often the case with American icons, the mythic honor of these authorities concealed a shadow side.
Do most black people feel like this?
Just as Edelman presents Simpson in a certain light while maintaining an objective ambiguity, he allows LAPD veterans to argue their department's innocence.
How do you know these cops are racist?
I have to give you the black man's guide to survival in LA.
Even as anecdote,
Don't fuck with LAPD.
counter-testimony, and visual evidence suggest otherwise.
And not one of them says in any document that they saw anything go wrong.
We are presented with police who are both professional,
Honest police department.
and prejudiced,
Feel the residue of that comment.
empathetic,
It was a 19-year-old girl.
and vicious,
But they even broke all the mirrors and stuff out of the bed.
burdened,
They worked 2 and 3 jobs just like I did as a
and
young
abusively powerful.
He can take your life.
As individuals, they are colorful and nuanced. As an institution,
The cops think
there's something else entirely.
and act.
Mark Fuhrman becomes the epitome of the LAPD's unique brand of rot, polished and impressive on the outside.
He's confident, he's tall, he's nice looking, has nice hair.
And then when the surface is yanked away, ugly, nasty, and all too representative of the forces that empower and push them in a certain direction.
This, I think, is one of the difficulties in meeting this, is that we're trying to find a failure other than the people themselves. They came in and flooded a community that wasn't prepared to meet them. We didn't ask these people to come here.
At the heart of OJ Made in America, impacting every single other category that I've discussed, is race.
If I have to die for my rights, I will.
Specifically, the black experience in America. This subject is contextualized more than anything other than Simpson himself.
What's happened over the last 400 years?
Stretching back even slavery, but focalized like all else through life in Los Angeles.
His response was, "I'm not black, I'm OJ."
At every turn, as he himself tries to escape race, Simpson's life is anchored in the African-American experience. His football career is contrasted with black power advocates.
And endorse him by saying, "Go, OJ, go."
Go, OJ, go! His herd spokesmanship is subtly racialized. Go, Jews, go! And of course, his trial for murder becomes one of the most indicative incidents of racial tensions in the past few decades.
The officers opened fire.
Edelman goes further than this, however, spending much of the film's running time far from Simpson to document lives and events that barely touched his, though their aftershocks would eventually determine his own fate.
Racism is not the Korean killing her. Racism is a court system that allows her to kill her.
People who bore the burden of these traumas would eventually receive the opportunity to acquit Simpson.
Do you think that they're members of the jury that voted to acquit OJ because of Rodney King?
Yes.
You do?
To celebrate his verdict as a victory.
Now you know how it feels.
And to view the entire event not as a reflection on his suspected crime, but as a long-awaited reprisal for police brutality,
I feel like a prisoner on the streets.
Systemic violence, and social aggression stretching back centuries. As its title suggests, Made in America is not just about O.J. Simpson, but also about our unusual society, a country unlike any other in the history of the world, self-defined and self-denying.
A real world, and we have dealt with racism all our lives.
An inspiring invention, always trying to escape the implications of its own origin. These 7 frameworks are all threads in this larger web, and they continue to spin their paths today. O.J. Simpson dreamt, achieved, fell, recovered, and ultimately faced the consequences of his actions and evasions. For now, at least, one half of the title seems to have reached its dark, dramatic conclusion. The other's fate remains to be seen.